Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. If you have not heard about it, for months there has been a protest going on by Dutch farmers in the Netherlands regarding the government policy which is restricting their use of nitrogen fertilizer. Uh, Basically, telling these farmers that they have to move completely away from nitrogen fertilizer. Well, those protests have failed. The government in the Netherlands just ramped this up, and they have closed or seized 3,000 farms, demanding that the farms stop using nitrogen fertilizer and instead use organic fertilizer. Well, first of all, organic fertilizer does contain nitrogen, but to a lesser degree. Anyway, Germany is following suit, making the same demands on their farmers. Now, if you don't know about the Netherlands is an agricultural powerhouse. They export a lot more produce than people actually realize. Anyway, so organic fertilizer is highly dependent on animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is dependent on crop output. To raise cattle or poultry of any kind requires grain for feed. Then, even organic fertilizer does contain nitrogen, as I stated. Organic fertilizer must be applied more frequently and in larger amounts than chemical fertilizer, otherwise, crop output is highly reduced. Animal agriculture results in far more greenhouse gas emissions than current chemical fertilizer use and production does. This is aside from the fact that we have seen crops contaminated with E. coli, salmonella, and other pathogenic organisms from organic fertilizer. And so that has resulted in large food recalls or destruction. Then the fertilizer supply must be discarded, the soil itself must be tested and allowed to go fallow until the contamination is resolved. So you've got farmland that is sitting there not being used because of this contamination. This means the farmer does not lose a single crop, but multiple consecutive crops. Now, people will say human waste can be composted and turned into fertilizer. Well, historically, this has been somewhat true, but you've also got, historically, this was called night soil. Yeah, you can compost human waste, but it has to be composted for a minimum of 3 years. Even years ago, there were contaminants from what people consumed and discarded and so forth into the water supply, which is where you get the human waste from. And they used to take large amounts of mercury. Well, today it's pharmaceuticals, and then you got all the chemicals that get dumped into the waterways. You got salts from detergents. Detergents virtually all contain salts, which will destroy crop output. You've got acids from things like drain cleaner and just unknown amounts of chemicals that can be absorbed into the crops. And then you're consuming those chemicals in one way or another because they either have to be removed by some way or they cannot be removed and they cannot be composted. So that's not a realistic option. Even if you have a way of doing this and you have to compost it for several years, then we don't have a large enough scale of such a system in place. If they were put in place and you wanted to have a rolling system of this, it's going to take you a minimum of 3 to 5 years to have that system in place to have any fertilizer coming from that route. So, meanwhile, Europe has seen massive crop reduction in 2022 due to drought. Up to 80% loss of crop output in multiple European countries. India also saw crop production increase to the degree that they ceased exporting wheat until further notice. As much as 2/3 of the United States has experienced some level of drought in 2022, resulting in crop output reduction from minor to complete crop loss. The last I heard, the Mississippi River was still so low that barges are stranded in multiple locations along its length. Africa has had drought and reduced fertilizer imports, resulting in widespread hunger to a degree that at least one East African is estimated to die of hunger every 36 seconds, according to a report from Oxfam. This is an humanitarian crisis which is getting worse. Though grain exports from Ukraine and Russia have continued arbitrarily, much of the grain is not being delivered to the low-income countries where it is needed most, instead being delivered to and seized by wealthier Western countries, mostly Europe. One should note that the Netherlands also had to close thousands of extremely large greenhouses used for food production due to energy prices, making them not only unprofitable, but forcing them to operate at a loss. The more that food supplies decline, the more food prices are forced upward, when food is available at all. Placing an adequate food supply at the personal level increasingly out of reach for hundreds of millions of people, with the number expanding by the hour. In wealthier countries like the U.S., food prices have increased so much that less affluent individuals and families are forced to divert spending from other necessities such as medical care and energy to maintaining an extremely basic food supply, which most often means an unhealthy diet. That unhealthy diet over an extended period of time carries the risk of other health issues such as stunted development, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Those health effects do or will cause greater debt and suffering once they manifest. Food scarcity results in violent social disruptions, a fact which is not debatable. So we're going to see that we've had reduced food output this year, which has already resulted in mass hunger, which I had spoken of months ago. Early in 2022, I said that this was going to happen. Now, some countries have started increasing insect production for insect protein for the food supply, which is not necessary. I mean, with current food production, we produce far more than is necessary. It's just out of reach for the majority of people. Even if you start producing insects on a large scale, how much is this going to cost? Are people going to be able to afford it? You put it in the hands of capitalists, and no, they're not going to be able to afford it. If you look up right now how much worm or cricket protein costs, it's a bougie thing. Your average person that's eating at Burger King or McDonald's or eating ramen, they're still not going to be able to afford this stuff. even if you increase the production, you're still going to have that profit motive that puts it out of reach. And in the interim, how many hundreds of millions of people are going to die as a result of this? Now, yeah, we need to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use. That's not a question. And my own policies on my presidential page, I have suggested things like increasing indoor farming, greenhouses, vertical farms, and so forth. But this is not suitable for large-scale crops like wheat and corn. But we could use it for legumes and, many other crops. I've suggested the production of lab-grown meat, which would be expensive at first, but over time that would be achievable, and it would reduce our use of nitrogen. It would divert grain that is used for animal feed and put it back into the human food supply, and so forth and so on. Yeah, it would take an adjustment, a mental adjustment for people to consume it. But would you rather eat bugs? In some impoverished countries, rats are part of the diet. Do you want to eat rats? Are we going to start farming rats for the food supply? Make your choice. At least if you're growing things in a lab, as long as you eliminate the risk of contamination, it would be at least safe to consume with extensive testing and development. Now, I'll admit that my own ideas have their own fallacies. All of them require a lot of energy input and research and development, and they are long-term. These are things that you look at for 10 years down the road. It's not going to solve anything right now. But shutting down farms during a time when global food production has seen a massive reduction, that's not a solution. So the prediction I made early in 2022 is going to actually get far worse in 2023, because now we have directly impacted the global food production for 2023. The war in Ukraine continues to rage, which is going to impact grain production coming from Ukraine, which is a considerable amount. Whether it impacts Russia or not is questionable, but even as Russia continues to produce food, whether it's being made available to the people that need it the most is a bigger question, because Western countries are more concerned with their inflation and their economies than they are with millions, hundreds of millions of people in poor countries dying of starvation. They have politicized human life at this point. I don't see any solutions to this except for diplomacy and realistic solutions. We have solutions, we have technology which are realistic and are available right this minute. The question is, will global leaders actually enact these policies and think in the long term? And the answer is very clearly no, they're not going to. I have not adhered to any of this conspiracy theory about depopulation, but when you look at things like this, you can see where people believing this may have some basis in fact. There is that possibility. All right, so these are things that don't have any solutions right now, except for, reaching out, contacting our elected officials, but I don't see any good coming from that either, considering that they're more interested in, Wall Street. So I'm telling you right now, hundreds of millions to billions of people are going to die of starvation probably within the next year on a global scale. And for the more developed countries, the suffering is going to just be put on steroids. Anyway, share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand this channel and my presidential campaign. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.